don't see you. From where it was? From the camera? How come? Shit. And this is nice angle. The stupid Monstera. How come? But the other camera did you put on?
I know. Oh no.
Tell me that this one is on. Yeah, it's recording.
Is it still recording?
Yes. I would like to, ask you about your work, because in your work you actually work with the biosurveillance. So how, in the context of the pandemic, in the context of how people, react, try to resist or ignore, how your work is now functioning, or maybe how did you change a certain perception of what is it about, or maybe actually it only strengthened and just show us a barometer of what is already happening.
So actually, one of the works that I made 2 years ago is called Vegetarian at Work Zero, or it has another title. The plants of Instagram perform ecosystem services, and it discusses precisely this smartwatch that is a form of biosurveillance that we actually submit to voluntarily. Or I would say it's a biosurveillance that functions on two levels. The first is the one where we are actually getting a report card of our bodies, of our efforts, of our work invested in how our bodies feel and look and function, how healthy they are. That then gives us, shows us how many calories we've burned, how many steps we've made. But all these smartwatches function only through the use of an application on the phone, and actually as it's sent to the phone and to the application, the data is collected, and in the terms of service, all of these applications say that they do actually sell this data to third parties or whatever. This happens, so maybe we have insight in what is on the screen on the watch and the data that we put into the application, but from then on it just sort of disappears in this digital underground, and yet the benefit of having our bodies quantified or our efforts distilled into these numbers of calories burned is enough to completely ignore the uncertainty of what happens with the data afterwards. And I think there is an interesting tension here. But beyond the critique of this situation, I really have been thinking of using these smartwatches as an interface to the big data and surveillance capitalism, but not only for humans, but rather also for plants. So if we take the plants that we have around here, I have my apartment full of them. I call them plants of Instagram because they are so beautiful and like scenographic, easy to care for. And they make our living environments somehow more pleasant. Even though while we are using them, we also are bound to them through this care, right? And this love eventually. And as we've seen recently, everybody's obsessed with plants and they just call plants over. They become our companions. So they're sort of in this weird space between being a capitalist product, of a bio-laborer, of they're cleaning air, they're sort of functional for also our psychological well-being. And yet, this is also how they are cared for, how they reproduce, how they survive. And so I really wanted to place the plants in the position of these persons, these agents that wear smartwatches, to be represented as entities producing data, and whatever happens with this data happens afterwards.
So Špela, so are you suggesting that we are plants, or we are like plants in the eyes of the capitalist surveillance now with the pandemic, you know, monitoring whether we have, what kind of temperature, body temperature we have, whether we have a corona or not, and
absolutely. I mean, that's sort of my realization from trying to understand how algorithms and these statistics and big data works. In the eyes of the algorithm, we are all plants. But what do these plants do? How do they live together? How do they survive? What are the relationships that they form within a system of surveillance that actually doesn't care about their individuality, their their feelings, still as a mass of bodies that the machine is dependent on, you know?
So in your installation, how does relationship between the plant and the surveillance function or works? Could you explain?
Yeah. So basically, we have these plants of Instagram that are monitored with sensors, and we're basically reading their action potential. And then based on this cellular electricity that they're producing, the drill machines are turned on and off, or they're actually pulling sort of a lever. And on these drill machines, there's the smartwatch. So as the drill machine turns, the smartwatch counts steps, right? And from that point on, this information about steps goes to these mobile applications, and they don't know actually that the agent behind these steps is actually a plant, but they are happily monitoring the plant's activity.
So who knows? So only the spectator of the installation knows that
Yes.
the data are generated actually not by people but by the plants.
Yes.
But could you explain from the beginning how come that the plants actually releases this data? How come the signals can be translated into the movement of the drills?
So the signals that we're picking up is part of the normal biology of plants, which they use much like we have nerve signals. They have also these sort of action potentials, they're called, or variable potentials. Basically electricity moving through their bodies. So this is what we're tapping into. And then on the other side, we have this drill machine. And that is actually used as a hack by people who want to have their body surveillance smartwatches show that they've made a lot of steps in case this data is actually used by, I don't know, insurance companies.
Yeah.
Or
has been already, right?
Yes, their employers, that they want to track their activities. So this is just an appropriation of a real world hack onto plants.
You said something previously that there is this tension, right, between plants being these laborers, just serving us to decorate our apartments, our post of Instagrams, and at the same time they are escaping because of this I don't know, I don't want to use the word weirdness, but because of they are so unlike us, they are escaping a sort of capture and relationship that we have, for instance, with other mammals or other beings in our apartments, right? And this brings me to, so you mentioned that there is this tension, and that this tension is interesting. And this brings me to your concept that you are using, and also within your title, the vegetarian. And you refer to the work of Katrina Sandilands, who actually points exactly to this clash that exists in the very word to vegetate, right? To vegetate means, on the one hand, to refrain, right? Being excluded from the society, from culture, from practices and life of political, social life. And at the very same time, it also means the vital force to produce life. So there is this clash between exclusion and at the same time conditioning the very life that you are excluded, or the body is excluded from. So for her, this word to vegetate, she calls it vegetarian, becomes a possibility, a catalyst for some resistance, right? And she says that the possibility to have the symbiotic relationship with a plant can generate or can formulate a particular practices of resistance. And I was wondering if you agree with that, and where do you take her ideas into your work? Because at some point in the way how you explained your the plants of Instagram, the relationship is not symbiotic. It feeds on some form of clash or some form of escapism or resistance that you tap into. What kind of practices or what kind of conditions that make certain practice possible come from the resistance that you are talking through your work and through the vegetarian that is that you can encounter through your installation.
So I've been recently developing sort of an opus or a series of works under the working title The Plant Machine. And this is actually a way to practice these posses, these different relationships within the vegetariat. The Plant Machine has sort of an overarching myth or mythos, and that is to make an AI, whatever that means, think itself a plant. So basically, to have a sort of a machine that is solipsistic in terms that all the input that it gets for the world, the image of the world it creates comes from a plant. So, and then vice versa, this plant machine creates the conditions of the environment for the plant not only to survive but to thrive. So I'm exploring plant pleasure, which is also something that is ungraspable. It's a sort of this unachievable phantasm.
Why unachievable?
Precisely because it cannot be described by science. We know that the aspects of computation in science that might provide some data or an image of the plant will never be able to give any satisfactory answer to the question of what is plant pleasure. And this is really important to have as a goal of an artistic project that involves so many different type of co-workers, from engineers, programmers, philosophers, artists, biologists, and of course plants, and all the microorganisms and all the different conditions that are sort of working to create this space of relation. So precisely by putting together this very heterogeneous group of entities, to pursue this slippery goal, this is a process of being with, caring for each other, and learning, observing, touching, interacting, and growing. This is like hugely it's a huge project with many different sort of manifestations that are artworks, concepts, philosophical concepts that develop, and yet actually the posse, this interaction that is created, is possible because of these members of the vegetariat spending time and paying attention. to one another. So that is how I'm trying to explore what the vegetarian can do.
So it's interesting that you are not talking about the relationship, the lonely relationship between plant and human, but what you are talking is about, contamination of a certain relationship that you have between multiple bodies, be it plant, be it human, be it machine, be it virus. That somehow you need understanding of the complexity of relationship rather than a relationship, like a lonely symbiotic relationship. So for you, this is a possibility, or this is somehow a resistance that vegetarians offer.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in relationship to this machine and these algorithms.
Špela, please tell about your recent project that you are now busy with.
So currently, the posse and I are developing this project titled Play, PLAI, and it's literally about creating the conditions for a game between a plant and a machine that is controlled by the algorithm, an algorithm, a self-learning neural network, to happen. So it's an active play between these two entities where the machine has the capacity to enter plant time. But the idea is actually, to equip this machine with just sort of a basic or sensorial apparatus, so it knows the position of the plant, and then the plants that we're working with are actually cucumbers, and cucumbers have tendrils, so like small thin the leaves or stems that they use to hold on to objects so they can climb. And so it would be a game between these tendrils that search the environment for something to hold on to, and this machine that has sort of that environment that they could grab onto. And the machine moves as fast as the plant, and then they're in a sort of an interaction. What we're trying to do is that we, as people, don't set the rules of the game in advance, but rather that these rules develop so that the plant and the machine sort of teach each other or decide each between themselves what the rules of the game are. And yes, it's an open question.
But it's interesting because what you are suggesting by this project is that a game can be played by a non-human or non-animal agent.
Yeah.
You agree?
Absolutely, because it seems that the act of playing or the game, ontologically speaking, is a way of understanding the world without necessarily having already a real world necessity associated with the action. And this freedom, much like, I don't know, biosemiotic freedom or semiotic freedom that all living entities possess, I think this capacity is so crucial for any life as a process of learning about the environment within which it is, also learning about themselves, right? I mean, a lot of these principles, I think, are used successfully in these robotics with different self-learning robots, either simulated or in reality. And so far, I think what we've learned is that plants have actually don't lack any property that we deem necessarily present for survival, but they express it in a way that we don't recognize. So it's more like not if plants can play, but rather how do they play.
But what interests me from what you just, how you describe your work and the project, the ongoing project, is that it taps into what Hausinga was exactly writing about. And so he was a philosopher, Dutch philosopher, and he would argue that a game, a play, is an ontological condition of life before even agents or what we define as subject and object is established. So he was against, for instance, Kant, who would say that a game is a higher capacity, a higher human capacity for imagination, for invention. So here we are talking about an ontological condition again, that game becomes, or game already is. And what happens is that through this game, through this condition of the game, we are learning how actually agent or agency is generated.
We will probably end up heavily anthropomorphizing this relation. Either that, or we might not be able to make sense of it. And I think that is sort of the tragedy of our limits. It's not necessarily a tragedy, but that those are our limits, right? So it's either identified as it working, and if it works, we will see something that we recognize, or it won't be working. And that means that basically we don't recognize the
what
properties.
What we already know.
Yeah.